Hello everybody and welcome to these talks on nutrition and recovery from COVID-19. What we eat and drink is a really important part of recovery from disease, but it's often overlooked because it's such a routine part of our everyday lives. But that is why it's so crucial. What we put in our bodies is an incredibly important part of recovery. I'm Mary Hickson and I'm Professor of Dietetics at the University of Plymouth. I'm working with colleagues from across the UK, and together we've brought you these talks to help you answer any questions you have about diet and the recovery from COVID-19. We have some great speakers who are real experts in their field. It's worth mentioning here, diet and nutrition are really difficult to study. If you change one nutrient, you change the whole diet. And also individual responses to dietary change are really variable. And this makes it hard for experts to give you hard and fast definitive advice. We don't have all the answers, and particularly so with this new disease. But we do want to share with you the best available evidence and practical advice. When you've finished watching any of the talks, there will be an option for you to ask questions. Use the Q&A function to post your questions. And at the end of June, we're hoping to post a final presentation where we will get all the speakers to answer the questions you have. We're really interested to know what you think about these talks. So please use the feedback option and give us your rating. Our great desire is to help people to recover well from COVID-19 and give them up-to-date advice on nutrition and diet. We really hope you find this a valuable and useful resource.
So thank you for joining the session that Elaine and I are going to be running over the next 30 minutes or so, which is all around how diet has changed during the pandemic and what dietary changes you can make to manage your long COVID symptoms. So my name is Dr. Sarah Berry. I'm a nutritional scientist at King's College London, and I have been involved in the Zoe COVID symptom study app, which has collected data over the last year from 4.5 million people in the UK, all about their COVID symptoms, their long COVID symptoms, and their diet. And I'm going to talk through some of these results. So I'm going to look at how the pandemic has disrupted our dietary habits and our lifestyle, how diet is related to COVID risk and severity, and also show you some of the more recent results that we've been looking at around long COVID. So I'll be running through this in the first 15 minutes of the talk, and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Elaine, who will kick off with some more in-depth insights into the work she's been doing around long COVID and diet. Elaine, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So so I'm a registered dietitian and I have a background in many types of rehabilitation. I'm also living with long COVID myself since I contracted COVID in April 2020. So I'll be covering what can help from a nutritional perspective to manage long COVID related symptoms. So I'll be looking at practical tips on how to manage nutrition and things like fatigue and taste and smell loss. And also looking around if there is a specific diet or supplement that can help with recovery. So we'll look at the different types of diets that people are talking about for long COVID, and if any are helpful, and including the use of supplements. So I'll hand back to Sarah to start her talk.
Fabulous, thanks Elaine. I'm going to kick off by looking at how the pandemic has impacted our diet and lifestyle and how this may impact COVID-19 risk and severity. I'm going to address 4 key points. Firstly, who has been most impacted by the disruption from the pandemic? Secondly, how has the pandemic changed our dietary habits and lifestyle? Thirdly, how is diet related to COVID-19 risk and severity? And then I'm going to finish very briefly by looking at some of the data we have around long COVID before handing over to Elaine, who will talk about the management of long COVID symptoms. Most of the work that I'm going to present stems from the Zoe COVID symptom study app. And this was an app that was launched in March of 2019 at a time where it was near on impossible to get a PCR COVID test. And the aim of the app was to build prediction algorithms in order to predict the likelihood that someone had COVID. Within a couple of weeks of launching, we had more than 4.5 million participants of the app who were logging on a daily basis their symptoms or absence of symptoms, from which we could predict the likelihood that they had COVID in real time across different regions of the UK. And as well as collecting data on symptoms, and then when the PCR test became more available on the positivity as well of people, we also collected lots of data on social economics, demographics, ethnicity, comorbidities, so whether they had asthma, cancer, high blood pressure, etc. Also behavioural aspects related to exposure to COVID, mask wearing. And more recently, we've been collecting data on long COVID. We also launched a diet quality, diet habits and lifestyle questionnaire. And it's this questionnaire that I'm going to focus much of the next 10 minutes of my talk on. This questionnaire was completed by a phenomenal 1.1 million people, which makes it the largest COVID pandemic diet questionnaire internationally. And this questionnaire focused on 3 key areas. It focused on diet quality, and we assessed this using a validated food frequency questionnaire, which involved questions on the frequency of portions of different types of food items. We also looked at dietary habits. This included snacking, food access, alcohol intake. We looked at other eating habits, such as the number of main meals people were consuming and the timing of their eating. And we looked at supplement use. For lifestyle, we assessed sleep in the weekday and also at the weekend, and physical activity, we looked at intensity and duration. And we also asked people to record their weight. All of these questions were asked pre-pandemic for the month of February 2020, and also for during the pandemic. So in the UK, we asked people to complete for the month of July 2020, and in the US, it was the month of September 2020. And this is a really exciting data set, because what the pandemic has done is really created a social experiment on a global scale that allows us to assess how a lifestyle disruptor impacts our dietary, lifestyle, and health behaviours. And as I'm sure we all know, the pandemic has caused huge disruption brought about by the many changes in regulations related to lockdown and the very day-to-day changes that we all experienced in our lifestyle due to this. And it affected all sorts of aspects as well alongside this, such as our dietary habits and our diet quality. And what we wanted to look at, well, who's been most impacted by the disruption from the pandemic? So to assess this, we created something called the Health Disruption Index. And we computed the individual change in all of our 1 million participants in the 5 metrics listed here. So in diet quality, alcohol frequency, physical activity, snacking frequency, and sleep duration. We selected these because we saw that these changed during the pandemic for many people, but also because we know that these 5 metrics are closely associated with health outcomes. What we observed was that the highest disruption was in younger individuals, in females, and in those living in more deprived areas. We also observed that those that were more disrupted, so younger women, also experienced the greatest weight change. Now, this weight change wasn't necessarily an unfavourable change. It wasn't always a gain. We had an equal amount of gain and loss, which we can go on to have a look at. So contrary to the many headlines that are out there, such as the Daily Mail headline shown here in the first pandemic saying coronavirus will make us fatter, we'll exercise less, we'll eat more. What we actually saw in our data across the whole of our population that we measured was that there was no mean change in weight across the population, but that lots of people gained weight and lots of people lost weight. And we also observed this in the US cohort of this study, and very similar findings have been found in European studies. So if we look at this figure that I've put here on the left, you can see here along this y-axis is the amount of weight change. Each of these lines here is 10,000 people. And so what you can see is for those that are highly disrupted, so many of those variables we talked about earlier that changed, they had a greater both weight loss, which is shown here, and they had a greater weight gain compared to those shown in blue who had low disruption. And this weight gain and this weight loss ranged anywhere from a loss of 18 kilos to a gain of up to 18 kilos. But what's important to note is while there was huge individual variability, as a whole, the population did not increase their overall weight. So as well as weight changing at an individual level, but not at a population level, we also looked at how diet and other lifestyle factors changed during the pandemic. We found for many of these factors, there was very little population change on average, but that there was a lot of individual changes we saw with weight. So, for example, with weight, we saw about 34% of the population increase their weight and about 32% decrease their weight. We saw similar changes in snacking, with about 18% increasing their snacking and a similar level decreasing their snacking. Similarly, with activity, we saw similar numbers increasing and similar numbers decreasing. But I think what's interesting to point out is a few changes that I find particularly interesting, and I think many of us could probably relate to. So, for example, we saw a greater number of people increasing their weekday sleep. So that was 15% of people, and we saw decreasing at 9%, which is likely due to people having less time commuting and therefore more time being able to stay in bed that extra hour or so in the morning. We also saw, interestingly, with alcohol, contrary to what we have been led to believe, again, by lots of the popular media that there was no mean change in the quantity of alcohol consumed. But what we saw, interestingly, was the frequency of people consuming alcohol went up, while the amount served at each event went down. So people were consuming alcohol more frequently over the week, but they were consuming less at each drinking event. We also saw, interestingly, an overall increase in the diet quality score. So the diet quality score is the overall measure of the quality of the diet, which is computed from the food frequency questionnaire. And interestingly, we saw about 39% of people increase their diet quality score, while about 26% of people decrease their diet quality score. And if we take a bit of a deep dive to have a look at what's causing this change in the diet quality score, we can look at the individual items from the food frequency questionnaire that everyone completed. And these are shown here. So we have fruits and vegetables, we have chips, for example, cheeses and yogurts, we have meats, we have fish, we have eggs and some other fast food, and we have refined grains. And what we find is if we look at the proportion of people that increased their intake of any of these items, which is shown in green, versus those that decreased, which is shown here in blue, that more people increased their fruits and vegetables and salad intake than decreased, and more people decreased their refined carbohydrate, which we know has unfavorable impact on health, than increased. But all of these other foods that are sitting here in the middle, generally, there was a similar level of increase and decrease. So generally, there wasn't a huge change apart from in these refined carbs and the fruit and vegetable intake. And similar results have been seen in other population studies in Europe. Now, if we take a bit of a step back and look at a couple of these in detail, which I think are interesting, and again, many of us could probably relate to. As I said, more people increased their fruits and vegetables during the pandemic. But interestingly, more people increased their beans and pulses, perhaps because these were the kind of products that people had sitting in their store cupboards. Also, there was a lot more people increasing their ice cream intake than decreasing, perhaps because people were reaching to comfort food during the pandemic. And what I find particularly relatable to is that many people were decreasing their pasta intake and very few increasing. Now, for those of you listening to this who live in the UK, you'll know that during the first few months of the first lockdown, it was near on impossible to actually get any pasta from your supermarkets. The shelves were stripped bare of pasta, and it's quite likely that this accounts for the reduction in food intake rather than a conscious choice by people. So, as well as us seeing some changes that we hadn't expected, this improvement in diet quality and this lack of change in weight, we also saw that the disruption was actually an impetus for change for the less healthy individuals. And this was an unexpected finding from our research, and again has been corroborated with other people's work. So what we did to assess this is we looked at people's pre-pandemic diet and lifestyle behaviour, and we categorised people into two different categories: those that had less healthy pre-pandemic diet and lifestyle behaviour, and those that had more healthy pre-pandemic diet and lifestyle behaviour. And what we found here, as you can see from the figure on the left, people that started with unhealthy behaviours actually went on to improve their behaviours. They improved their diet quality score, they increased their physical activity, and these were the people that lost weight. People that started off already healthy made very little changes. They actually retained their behaviour. They didn't get better and they didn't get worse. And this is really encouraging because, again, there's been a lot of speculation that those starting off worse just went on to get worse. But actually, as we can see here, it was an impetus, I think, for many individuals. Now, it is important to note that the people completing this questionnaire are self-selected individuals, they're highly motivated individuals, and they're not necessarily reflective of the typical UK population. So we do need to be a little bit mindful of how we interpret this across the whole of the UK population. So let's move on to look at how diet is related to COVID risk and severity. And this is something else we're also able to look at in the COVID symptom study, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we were collecting on a daily basis data on both people's positive symptoms and COVID test results, and also looking at the number of symptoms so we could look at severity of COVID. And what we found is those individuals that had a higher diet quality were associated with a reduced risk by about 5% of the chances of having COVID, and a reduction in the severity of COVID if they did get COVID by about 10%. And just this week, another study recently came out across European cohorts where they looked at plant-based or fish-based diets. And they found that if you had both a plant-based or a fish-based diet, it reduced your severity of COVID infection by quite a large amount, which is really encouraging. And whilst, again, we need to be a little bit cautious with our interpretation of these results, because these studies are just showing association. They're not what we call randomized controlled trials that show a direct causality of diet in protecting us against COVID. I think the previous talks in this series have illustrated to you that some of the nutrients that are contained in plants and fish do have important impacts on our immune function. So it stands to reason that those diets that are more richer in healthy plant-based foods and oily fish would have some sort of protective effect on and beneficial effect on our immune system. So what does the data tell us about long COVID? Well, how many people does long COVID affect? What we found in our data set is about 13% of people are still reporting COVID symptoms after a month, about 4.5% after 2 months, and 2.3% after 3 months. And similar results are found from other big studies and from the Office of National Statistics as well. Who does it affect? In our cohort, and again in many other cohorts, we've seen that females tend to be more affected than males, although it does still affect many males. And we find that whilst it affects all different age groups, it's the 40 to 55-year-olds that seem to be most affected by long COVID. Moving on to look at the symptoms, what this figure here on the right shows is the percentage of people reporting these symptoms here. Now, we have reported in our data set many more symptoms than just these, but these are the key ones that seem to be quite consistent. So we have about 98% of people still reporting fatigue, about 90% headaches, and around 70% still reporting loss of smell, shortness of breath, persistent cough, and sore throat. So for a large proportion of our population, long COVID is really causing many long-term symptoms and really impacting day-to-day diet quality. And what Elaine's now going to talk to you about is how diet and other lifestyle factors may impact long COVID, and therefore how you can implement strategies to try and reduce the negative impact that long COVID has on your quality of life. And I'll hand you over to Elaine now. Thank you very much for listening.
As mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, I'm going to cover what can help from a nutritional perspective to manage long COVID-related symptoms, and is there a specific diet or supplement that can help recovery? Many of the long COVID symptoms can have a significant impact on our nutrition. Fatigue can affect if we can shop, prepare, and eat food. And similarly, breathing issues can impact these things and how much we are able to eat. Smell and taste loss will affect what we choose to eat as well as how much. And many of us will have poor appetites and lose weight. Symptoms such as reflux, diarrhea, and nausea are common. And neurological symptoms such as brain fog, lack of concentration, again can impact our ability to plan our meals, and we can even forget to eat. Having a dry mouth can impact our chewing and swallowing and the types of food that we can eat. And even living with long COVID can impact our lives, and if we are low in mood, we might choose to eat differently. Weight gain is very common due to the lack of activity and also what we are able to eat and enjoy. Pain such as headaches or body aches might also put us off our food. So a variety of symptoms can really have a significant impact on our nutritional intake. So when it comes to preparing food, it might be better to spread this throughout the day. You might find sitting down when chopping vegetables or taking rests in between preparing different ingredients for meals might also help. Smaller meals might be better so you're not overfaced. And these might need to be more energy dense, and we'll talk about this later. You may struggle with shopping, so asking for help from family or friends and neighbours is important. And you might also try online shopping. The NHS Volunteer Responder Service might also be able to help you with this, and I'll share details of this at the end. It's good to try and plan ahead, especially if you do have some good days with ear fatigue or breathing. You can try and batch cook on those days, or even at the weekend when you have more time or even more help. And you can freeze these so you can use them on bad days. Try to stick to easy and quick meals rather than complicated dishes. So things like beans on toast or a jacket potato with cottage cheese. Slow cooker meals are also helpful, and even tray bakes can also be really quick, and again there's less of a wash up to do. When we're fatigued, we might choose the higher and fat and sugar alternatives to try and boost our energy. So just bear this in mind, as this actually might be making you feel worse. However, remember, your diet might not be perfect, and that is okay. A loss of smell can affect how well we can detect flavours and taste our food. If you go off a particular food, do try it again regularly, as your taste may continue to change. If you're struggling with the strong taste of hot foods, then try cold foods instead and experiment with temperatures. You might like to try warm and cold foods together, such as a warm chicken salad. Try to keep your mouth clean and healthy by brushing your teeth morning and evening and rinsing your mouth with water if it feels dry or uncomfortable throughout the day. If you find cooking smells are affecting your appetite, then try microwave ready meals, as these require less cooking time. Or you might find cold foods are a good alternative in the short term. So experiment with herbs, spices, chutneys and pickles in cooking, or add sauces after you've eaten or after you've prepared the food. So things like applesauce, mustard, pickles. Try marinating meats or other protein sources with sweet and sour marinades, particularly if they taste bitter or metallic. Sharp and tart flavoured foods, such as orange, lemon and lime flavours, can be really helpful in balancing very sweet tastes. You might also find smell training is helpful, and you can find more information on this on the Absent charity website. You may have lost weight due to a lot of your symptoms. It is important to try and minimize this weight loss when you're in recovery. Even if you think you're overweight, you may have lost a significant amount of muscle, and regaining muscle strength is important for your recovery. Ideally, you should be monitoring your weight as long as this has not been an issue for you in the past. If you can't weigh yourself, then you might find your clothes or jewellery are looser, and this might be an indication of a significant weight loss. If it is unintentional weight loss, particularly if you've lost more than 10% of your initial body weight, then it is important to seek advice from your GP or healthcare professional. Eating little and often might help. So, for example, having 3 smaller meals a day and 3 nourishing snacks and drinks. And you might also find smaller plates are helpful to avoid being overfaced. You can buy over-the-counter supplement drinks from local pharmacies, or they can also be prescribed. Ask your GP to refer you to a dietitian for further advice and support if you are really struggling with weight loss and appetite. There's some useful information on the Your COVID Recovery website on ways to increase the energy and protein content of your diet. So, for example, adding extra nut butters to your foods and snacks, or having nourishing puddings and snacks such as yogurts. Have a look and see if any of these ideas are helpful for you. If you have a dry mouth due to feeling breathless, because you have a cough, or because of medication side effects, then a softer and moist diet might be better for you. Remember to keep your mouth nice and moist and brush your teeth regularly. And it's important to also keep yourself hydrated. So have at least 6 to 8 cups of fluid in the day and take regular sips of fluid throughout the day. You might find adding extra sauces to food like gravy or cheese sauce helpful. And sugar-free sweets or chewing gum might also be helpful to increase saliva production. But I would advise this with caution, particularly if you're having problems with your bowels, as sweeteners can make wind and diarrhea worse. If you do have diarrhea, and this goes on for a long time, I would seek advice from your GP. They may try some medications, or they might want to investigate this further. Bear in mind that diarrhea can be caused by medications such as antibiotics. It may also be from a food intolerance. And food intolerances have been covered in a previous webinar, so I would urge you to have a look at this. You might already have gastrointestinal issues before COVID, and these might have been impacted. So working with a dietitian might be helpful. It is also important to prevent dehydration and ensure you are drinking enough throughout the day. You might find avoiding or reducing caffeine is also helpful, and particularly artificial sweeteners as well. Nausea can be a difficult symptom to manage and can be due to a variety of reasons. You might need medications if it is affecting your intake, particularly at meal times. Sometimes eating dry foods might be better for you, and also some people find ginger flavoured foods and drinks can help. If you have reflux, you might also find certain foods problematic. For example, spicy or citrus fruits. Try to avoid lying down for a couple of hours after eating, although this might be difficult for you if you're resting a lot in the day. You might try raising the head of your bed a few inches when you're sleeping to see if this helps. If you have particular foods that do cause problems with reflux, doing your own food diary might help. If you're finding that you're having issues with swallowing, do seek advice from your GP, especially if you're coughing or choking when you're eating and drinking. Symptoms like memory problems and pain, might cause issues with what we choose to eat, as we might be trying to have more comforting foods. Again, these might be higher in fat and sugar, and we might have these to try and help us feel better. Again, having these in small amounts won't have an impact on our overall recovery. But if we're choosing these types of foods daily, then our bodies might not be getting the right amount of nutrients. So having the healthier options in the house will help with this. And if you can, try not to buy too much of the sugary and fatty foods like crisps, biscuits and chocolate. You might be concerned about weight gain. So it's important to still try and get a variety of foods in your diet and not put yourself on any drastic weight loss diets whilst you're still unwell. Unless, of course, this is under the direction of a medical professional. You might need to look at your portion sizes, particularly if you're doing less activity than you used to. And again, taking into account of those unhealthy snacks, which are high in sugar and fat. There is helpful information on the Malnutrition Pathway website around eating well when you've not lost weight after COVID. So which is the best type of diet to have? So unfortunately, there's no specific diet that prevents or cures long COVID. It is important to highlight that many of the diets being promoted for long COVID can be restrictive and cut out a lot of food. And this comes with an additional nutritional risk to consider. It's also important to mention that everyone is different. One diet that has gained some attention is the low histamine diet. And Hannah Hunter, who is an allergy dietitian, has covered this in detail in a previous webinar. And as she mentions, there is currently no evidence to directly support it to cure long COVID, and we just have anecdotal reports at the moment. It is restrictive, so it isn't suitable for everyone, and should only be trialled for a limited amount of time, for example, 2 to 4 weeks, and ideally with close support and supervision of a registered dietitian. If you do want to read more about this diet, there's also information on the British Dietetic Association website. There have also been reports of people trying fasting or low levels of carbohydrates in their diet. But again, we don't know, we don't have enough evidence to support this. It has also been made very popular by celebrities claiming it has helped them to recover from long COVID. However, we need to take into consideration that they are not doctors and they are often trying to sell you something. If we cut out carbohydrates when we are recovering, then this might affect our energy and concentration levels and might make us feel even more fatigued. Timing of our food might be more of an individual choice. So we might choose to eat later in the night, not to eat later at night if we struggle with reflux, and that's okay. However, there's no evidence to support long periods of fasting for recovery. When you think about it, you're already fasting when you're sleeping overnight, so you're likely to be going, say, 8 to 10 hours without food anyway. We don't recommend skipping meals, which would normally be required in fasting, as it might mean missing out on vital nutrients needed, such as vitamins, minerals, and proteins. So ideally, we are still aiming to get a balance of nutrients, of our proteins, our carbohydrates, our vitamins and minerals. Which leads us nicely onto the Mediterranean diet. And although there is currently no evidence related to this diet in long COVID, it is a balanced way of eating that is linked with numerous health benefits, including reduced inflammation. And Professor Calder also mentions this in his webinar. Therefore, it is a sensible way of eating for many people with long COVID. The Mediterranean diet includes foods such as oily fish, nuts and seeds, fruit and vegetables, and monounsaturated fats like olive and rapeseed oil. However, bear in mind, if you're following a particular diet, such as the low histamine diet, you might find the Mediterranean diet difficult to follow. You can find more information on this diet on the British Dietetic Association website, and I'll link to this at the end. We've talked a lot about diet, but we also need to consider if we're getting adequate hydration. Normally we need between 1.6 to 2 litres of fluid a day, but when we're ill, particularly if we're having temperatures or sweating more, then we might need to have extra fluids. If you are unsure about whether you're well hydrated, check the colour of your urine. It should be a pale straw colour. If it is darker than this, then you need to drink more. Do remember though that medications and vitamin supplements, which many of you might be on, might impact the colour of your urine. So what are the best things to drink? Well, water is the best way to get hydration, but you can also have things like sugar-free squash, fizzy water, juice, and up to 150 ml of fruit juice in the day. Milk is also a very helpful fluid to drink. And you can also have tea and coffee as part of your fluid intake. But remember having no more than 400 milligrams of caffeine a day. So, for example, up to 4 cups of instant coffee. And we don't think this amount is dehydrating. So there's been a lot of recommendations around supplements and long COVID. There is some emerging evidence about the possible role of vitamin D in reducing the risk and severity of COVID, although there's not enough evidence yet to establish a cause and effect link. It is recommended already that adults take 10 micrograms of vitamin D to maintain our bone and muscle health, particularly during the months of October to March, or all year round for those who have little or no sunshine exposure. And again, this might be relevant to you if you're feeling unwell and you're not getting out. If you do choose to take higher dosages of vitamin D, we know that up to 100 micrograms is thought to be safe, but we don't know if more is. With vitamin C, this is also well known for its importance in our immune health. And caution is advised at high doses, as this can cause gastrointestinal effects such as diarrhea when we're consuming more than 1,000 milligrams a day. So that is the maximum amount recommended by the NHS based on available evidence. B vitamins such as niacin have also been receiving a lot of attention, but again, there's no concrete evidence to suggest they can help with long COVID. If you are taking a B vitamin supplement, then check out the safe upper limits for B vitamins, including niacin, on the NHS Choices website. It's worth noting that some forms of niacin taken in large amounts can cause unpleasant side effects such as flushing, so caution is advised. And also taking high doses for a long time could lead to liver damage, so be aware of this. With selenium, taking up to 350 micrograms or less a day is unlikely to cause any harm. However, it is very easy to get selenium through the diet. For example, 5 to 6 Brazil nuts will provide 64 to 76 micrograms of selenium. It can also be found in other foods such as fish and meat and eggs, baked beans, lentils and kidney beans. Zinc is another well-known mineral said to be important for our immune function, and people may choose to take it as a supplement. It is thought again that up to 25 milligrams of zinc supplements a day are safe, but again, you can also get zinc from your foods, so meat, shellfish and dairy foods, whole grain cereals, beans and nuts. Taking high doses of magnesium, so more than 400 milligrams a day for a short time, can cause diarrhea. And again, there's not enough evidence to say what the effects might be of taking higher doses for a longer time. We normally advise that you should be able to get all your vitamin and minerals you need from your diet. But if you're unwell, you might feel taking a multivitamin and mineral supplement helpful. These tend to have safe levels in them, but always check with your doctor or pharmacist first, especially if you're on other medications, to make sure that they don't interact. The gut microbiome is also linked to immunity and inflammatory status. Emerging research is showing that gut health might be compromised in long COVID and COVID infection, and that gut microbiome status can influence our health outcomes. Probiotics and prebiotics have been suggested as having a potential role in supporting the gut microbiome to help reduce the severity of clinical outcomes in COVID-19. However, more research is needed in this area, especially in regards to the benefits of particular strains. This is because not all probiotics work in the same way, and trials are going on in this area, so watch this space. Probiotics are good bacteria, and they can improve the balance of our gut bacteria and health, and can be found in products such as fermented milk drinks, some yogurts, and some supplements. They are generally safe for healthy people to take. However, if you have a compromised immune system that does not work properly, then they might be more risky to take, so you should seek professional advice beforehand. You can also try and improve your gut microbiome by choosing a diet which is rich in things like high fiber foods, fruit and vegetables, whole grains, beans, and some fermented foods. So in summary, at present, there is no particular diet or supplement that can treat long COVID, but there are a number of nutrients that can support the normal function of the immune system. A balanced and varied diet alongside a vitamin D supplement can help provide the vitamins and minerals that you need and other nutrients. You might need an additional supplement if you're deficient in any nutrients, and you should speak to your GP if you are concerned. If you do choose to take supplements, particularly if they're high dose, do be cautious about this. There are lots of natural bacteria in our gut, which can also help us stay healthy, but these can sometimes be knocked out of balance, and so it is worth trying to achieve the best gut health that you can. Thank you for listening.